He was the future of the NBA, explosive, fearless, and universally loved. But in a single season, a series of choices off the court began to threaten everything he built on it. This isn't about highlights or dunks. This is the story of how decisions pushed Ja Morant to the very edge of superstardom. Welcome to Off-Court Truths, where we break down the moments, choices, and hidden pressures that turn rising stars into cautionary tales, and sometimes into something more. Ja Morant didn't arrive in the NBA with hype manufactured by legacy or pedigree. He earned it the hard way. Raised in Dalzell, South Carolina, Morant grew up in a modest environment where discipline, work ethic, and belief mattered more than spotlight. Lightly recruited out of high school, he was overlooked by major programs until a chance encounter led Murray State to take a closer look. That opportunity changed everything. Morant exploded in college, showcasing a rare blend of speed, vision, fearlessness, and creativity that instantly separated him from his peers. Drafted second overall in 2019, Morant became the face of the Memphis Grizzlies almost overnight. His game was electric: violent drives, impossible finishes, fearless leadership, and an edge that felt authentic rather than forced. Fans embraced him as the embodiment of a new NBA era. He wasn't polished. He was raw, emotional, and unapologetically himself. By his third season, Morant had already led Memphis deep into the playoffs, earned All-NBA honors, and positioned himself as one of the league's fastest rising superstars. But with rapid success came rapid pressure. Fame arrived faster than maturity. Expectations multiplied. Every move was watched, recorded, and judged. Off the court, Morant began navigating an identity far more complicated than basketball, one shaped by image, loyalty, ego, and the weight of being a franchise savior at a young age. The question was no longer whether Ja Morant could dominate the NBA. It was whether he could survive everything that came with it. The breaking point for Ja Morant arrived not from a single mistake, but from a pattern that began to spiral in full public view. During the 2022-2023 season, concerns about Morant's off-court behavior quietly followed him as his stardom grew louder. Reports surfaced about confrontations, questionable associations, and moments that suggested a young superstar struggling to balance identity with responsibility. At first, the league and fans treated them as noise, growing pains for a player still learning how to live under constant attention. Everything changed when Morant appeared on social media holding a firearm during a late-night livestream. The image spread instantly. Within hours, the conversation shifted from basketball to accountability. The NBA launched an investigation. The Grizzlies suspended him. Sponsors watched closely. What should have been a season defined by MVP-level performances suddenly became a referendum on judgment and maturity. Morant addressed the situation publicly, acknowledging the seriousness of his actions and stepping away from the team. But the damage was already done. Analysts questioned his leadership. Fans debated whether this was a lapse or a warning sign. The league, tasked with protecting its image, faced a difficult decision with one of its brightest young stars. For the first time in his career, Ja Morant's future felt uncertain. Not because of injury or talent, but because the choices he made off the court had begun to threaten everything he had built on it. Ja Morant's slide toward the edge did not happen in a vacuum. It unfolded across a season where brilliance on the court ran parallel to mounting concern off it, each moment amplifying the next until the line between superstardom and self-sabotage blurred beyond recognition. To understand how one season of decisions reshaped his trajectory, the timeline must be followed carefully, because every step mattered. The season opened with Morant firmly established as one of the league's most magnetic forces. Memphis played with swagger, confidence, and belief. Morant's game was fearless and defiant, marked by audacious drives into traffic and a leadership style that fed off emotion. He spoke openly about wanting smoke from anyone, anywhere. To fans, it sounded like competitive fire. To critics, it hinted at something less controlled. Still, the wins came, the highlights stacked up, and the conversation stayed mostly on the court. As the months passed, subtle warning signs appeared. Reports circulated about confrontations involving Morant and members of his inner circle, incidents that did not lead to formal charges, but raised eyebrows inside league circles. Each story on its own seemed manageable. Together, they formed a pattern. The Grizzlies, intent on protecting both their star and their culture, attempted to keep issues internal. The NBA monitored quietly. Publicly, Morant remained the face of youth and excitement. Privately, pressure was building. The tension escalated during a road trip late in the season. After a loss, Morant appeared on a personal live stream, late at night, music blasting, energy high. Then the moment that changed everything flashed across the screen, Morant holding a firearm. The clip spread at the speed of the internet, stripped of context and magnified by consequence. By morning, the story dominated every sports show, every social feed, every group chat. The league could not ignore it. The Grizzlies could not downplay it. Morant could not outrun it. The immediate response was swift. Memphis announced Morant would step away from the team. The NBA opened a formal investigation. Sponsors paused, evaluated, and waited. Teammates were forced into awkward press conferences, insisting on support while grappling with disappointment. Coaches emphasized accountability without condemnation. The message was clear but delicate. This was serious, and it had to be addressed. Morant issued a public statement acknowledging his actions and apologizing to the organization, his teammates, and the fans. He entered counseling, framing the decision as a necessary step toward growth. For some, it was a sign of maturity. For others, it felt reactive, an attempt to contain damage rather than confront root causes. The league ultimately issued a suspension, reinforcing that standards applied regardless of talent or age. The season, once filled with championship ambition, now carried a heavy asterisk. When Morant returned, the atmosphere was different. Every move was scrutinized, every celebration dissected. On the court, he tried to channel focus into performance, delivering bursts of the old brilliance. Off the court, the leash was shorter. The margin for error had vanished. Memphis preached unity, but trust had been shaken. The playoffs arrived with tension simmering beneath the surface. Then, just as the narrative seemed to stabilize, another clip emerged months later. Another live stream, another firearm. The déjà vu was devastating. The league's patience evaporated. Public sentiment hardened. The NBA responded with a far more severe suspension, signaling that this was no longer about a single lapse, but about pattern and responsibility. The message was unmistakable. The edge had been reached. The fallout rippled outward. Sponsors recalibrated relationships. Commentators reframed Morant's story from youthful exuberance to cautionary tale. Fans who once defended him began to question whether he understood what was at stake. Teammates, while supportive, spoke more carefully. The Grizzlies confronted a reality no franchise wants to face. Their cornerstone was also their greatest risk. Throughout this timeline, one truth remained constant. Morant's talent never disappeared. His athleticism, creativity, and competitive spirit were intact. What changed was the context. Each decision off the court amplified consequences on it. Each incident narrowed the path forward. The season became a hinge point. Before it, Morant was the future without caveat. After it, every discussion of his greatness came with an asterisk shaped like responsibility. This timeline is not about condemnation. It is about accumulation. Small choices stacked into big outcomes. Warnings that became consequences. A year that transformed a rising superstar into a player standing at the edge, forced to decide which direction his next step would take. To understand Ja Morant's struggle, you have to understand the psychological collision between rapid fame and unfinished identity. Morant entered the NBA young, gifted, and emotionally driven. His confidence was forged through competition, loyalty, and a deep need to prove himself after years of being overlooked. That chip fueled his rise, but it also shaped how he responded to attention once he had it. When the world finally watched, he didn't just want to win. He wanted to be seen as authentic, fearless, and unfiltered. The problem was timing. Morant's sense of self was still forming when superstardom arrived. He was asked to be a leader, a role model, and a brand ambassador before he had fully learned how to separate personal identity from public responsibility. The persona that resonated with fans, raw, defiant, emotional, also left little room for restraint. Each moment of validation reinforced behavior that felt genuine in private, but risky in public. There is also the psychology of inner circles. Young stars often anchor themselves to loyalty, surrounding themselves with people who knew them before the fame. That loyalty can be grounding, but it can also blur boundaries. According to reports, Morant struggled to recalibrate those relationships under the microscope of the NBA, where perception matters as much as intent. Actions that felt normal in one context became dangerous in another. At his core, Morant was not rebelling against the league. He was wrestling with who he was allowed to be versus who he believed he was. The tension between authenticity and accountability became overwhelming. When mistakes happened, they weren't rooted in malice. They were rooted in immaturity, impulsivity, and the weight of being young in a world that rarely allows second chances. Morant's psychological battle was not about losing his talent. It was about learning control before control was taken from him. The climax of Ja Morant's season arrived the moment the NBA made it clear that patience had run out. After the second firearm-related livestream surfaced, the conversation shifted instantly from concern to consequence. This was no longer about a young star making a mistake. It was about repeated behavior in defiance of clear warnings. The league responded with a lengthy suspension, one that sent a message far beyond Memphis. Talent would not outweigh responsibility. For Morant, the announcement landed like a sudden silence after constant noise. Practices, games, and the rhythm that had defined his life were gone. What remained was time to sit with the reality that his decisions had not only affected himself, but an entire organization, a fan base, and the image of the league. Teammates spoke carefully, expressing support while acknowledging disappointment. The Grizzlies emphasized accountability. The NBA emphasized standards. Public reaction hardened. Defenders grew quieter. Critics grew louder. The narrative crystallized around a single question. Did Ja Morant understand the stakes? The league believed it had given him every opportunity to course correct. Now the consequences were unavoidable. In that moment, Morant stood at the edge of two futures. One path led to redemption through restraint, humility, and change. The other led to isolation, squandered potential, and a career defined by what could have been. The suspension was not just a punishment, it was a line drawn in public view, forcing a choice that would define the rest of his career. You could feel it across the league. This wasn't about one season anymore. It was about whether Ja Morant would grow up before the game moved on without him. The consequences of Ja Morant's decisions extended far beyond the suspension itself. Professionally, the damage cut into trust, the most fragile currency a franchise star can lose. The Grizzlies had built their identity around Morant's energy and leadership, and suddenly that foundation felt unstable. Coaches were forced to adjust plans. Teammates had to answer questions they never asked for. The organization shifted from building toward a title to managing risk. Financially, the impact was immediate. Morant forfeited salary during his suspension, and endorsement relationships faced renewed scrutiny. Brands that once aligned effortlessly with his image paused to reassess, weighing excitement against responsibility. In the modern NBA, perception moves markets, and Morant's perception had changed overnight. Publicly, the tone hardened. Fans who once defended him with unconditional loyalty began to demand accountability. Commentators reframed his story from youthful exuberance to a warning about boundaries. Each highlight from his past was now paired with reminders of what he had jeopardized. The narrative followed him everywhere, compressing his margin for error to almost nothing. Perhaps the heaviest consequence was internal. Morant lost control of his own timeline. Decisions made in moments of impulse dictated months, then seasons of consequences. The freedom he once enjoyed as a rising star vanished, replaced by scrutiny that never blinked. Every future action would be measured against this chapter. The NBA didn't erase Ja Morant. It recalibrated him. And in doing so, it made one thing clear. Greatness can open doors, but only discipline keeps them open. Morant's next steps would determine whether these consequences became a turning point or the beginning of a permanent slide. Ja Morant's comeback was never going to be immediate, dramatic, or cinematic. It began quietly, away from arenas and cameras, in a space where reflection mattered more than reputation. With basketball taken from him, Morant was forced to confront something he had long avoided: stillness. For the first time since his rise, he had to live without the game as a daily outlet for emotion, identity, and validation. According to statements from the team and Morant himself, the months away were spent addressing personal responsibility, decision-making, and the consequences of leadership. This wasn't about public image repair. It was about learning how to exist within structure without feeling constrained by it. The challenge was internal. Morant had to separate confidence from recklessness, loyalty from obligation, authenticity from impulse. When he returned, the atmosphere around him was noticeably different. The cheers were still there, but they were cautious. Teammates welcomed him, yet expectations shifted. Leadership was no longer assumed. It had to be earned again. On the court, Morant showed flashes of the same brilliance. Explosive first steps, fearless attacks, moments that reminded everyone why he mattered. But there was also restraint, less bravado, more control. The game looked familiar, but the approach felt more measured. Off the court, Morant kept a lower profile. Public appearances were limited. Messaging was careful. Every move carried the awareness that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Fans remained divided, some ready to forgive, others waiting for proof. The league watched closely, not with anticipation, but with expectation. This comeback was not about erasing the past. It was about redefining the future. Morant's talent ensured he would always have a place on the court. His challenge was proving he deserved one beyond it. The path forward demanded consistency, humility, and patience. Qualities that do not show up on highlight reels but determine careers. Ja Morant's return was not a victory lap. It was a test, a chance to show that growth could follow consequence, and that a superstar on the edge could step back, not by force but by choice. Ja Morant's story is a modern lesson about how quickly the line between promise and peril can disappear. Talent can lift a player into superstardom, but it cannot protect them from the consequences of their choices. In a league built on visibility, every decision echoes louder, travels faster, and lasts longer than intended. Morant's rise showed what happens when confidence is fearless. His fall reminded us what happens when confidence lacks restraint. This is not a story about cancellation or condemnation. It is a story about timing, maturity, and accountability arriving later than fame. Morant represents a generation of athletes navigating identity in real time, under constant surveillance with little room to learn privately. His journey forces us to ask a harder question. How many young stars are prepared for the weight of being seen? The lesson is simple but unforgiving. Greatness is not only measured by what you can do on the court, but by whether you can protect it when the world is watching. Ja Morant's story is still being written. Comment below which NBA star on the edge you want us to examine next, or right here on Off Court Truths.